Everyone, please write this down. A cosine bx minus c plus d. Okay, so yesterday we mostly reviewed what A and D do to our graph, right? A gives you the amplitude. D gives you the midline. So for example, maybe you saw something like 3 cosine x minus 1. Your midline would be right here, and your amplitude is 3. So you know you would be here, 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 and here. That would be your cosine graph. Your amplitude is 3 spaces away from the midline. Your midline is at -1, and you would graph it from 0 to 2 pi. Okay? Now, that is a vertical. Those are what affects your graph vertically. Now we're going to be looking at the B value and the C value and how that affects your graph. Okay? So, please write this down. This is what you need to know. In order to find the period, you do 2 pi divided by the absolute value of B. So in my simple example here, my B value is just 1. So 2 pi over 1 is still just 2 pi. That's why it completes its cycle within 2 pi. However, this problem that we have up here is a little bit different. I'm going to go ahead and distribute this. This becomes 1/2 x plus pi over 2. And I'll just write down cosine. Okay, do you guys see what my B value is? 1/2. So let's use our formula. To find out my period, I'm going to do 2 pi divided by the absolute value of 1/2 is just 1/2. So this becomes 4 pi. So my period is 4 pi. If my period is 4 pi, that means it takes 4 pi to do a whole cosine cycle. So let me just erase this real quick. All right, so that means my period is 4 pi. You always want to break your period into 4 different parts, 4 equal parts. So if I break 4 pi into 4 parts, it would be pi, 2 pi, and 3 pi. Okay, now let's talk about phase shift. The way you find phase shift is you equal bx minus c, equal it to 0, and solve it. So in my case, this is my bx plus c part right here. We're going to equal that to 0 and solve. So that's 1/2 x plus pi over 2 equals 0. So subtract pi over 2. We get 1/2 x equals negative pi over 2. Now we're going to multiply both sides by 2. And those 2's cancel. So that means my phase shift is negative pi. So that is my phase shift, negative pi. That means I move to the left, negative pi. Normally, I would graph it like this and be done. However, we have to shift it to the left, so it's going to look more like this. It's going to shift over to the left. So let me do that for you. You basically copy this side over here. So negative pi, negative 2 pi, negative 3 pi, and so on. But I'm only scooting over negative pi. So that means your graph would look like this. Right? So that's your graph. And of course, you can imagine this just continuing on both sides. Your domain is all real numbers, and your range is -1 to +1. And your relative maximum, there's two of them, here and here. So this is at negative pi 1, and this second one is at 3 pi 1. Those are your two maximums. And then your relative minimum is down here at pi and negative 1. Okay. So let me recap real quick. To find the period, you do 2 pi over the absolute value of b. Once you find your period, you want to split it into 4 parts. So I knew my period was 4 pi, so split it into pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. And do the same on the other side, going negative, okay? And then you need to find your phase shift. So to find the phase shift, you do bx minus c equal to 0 and solve it. That's how you know how far left or right to go. Since it was negative pi, you go to the left pi. Okay? And then you draw your 5 points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what a cosine graph looks like. Okay. A little bit more. Did I have a d value in my problem? This is in parentheses. I didn't have a d value. That means right here is my midline. That's how I knew to start it right here, or go through these points. And what's my amplitude? What's my a value? 1. My a value is 1. That's how I knew to go 1 up from my midline. Okay? All right. Now, you could always do it the longhand version. Once you find your period and you write down what values you would plug in for cosine, let me show you how that matches up. I'll just do one. So the equation is, the original problem was cosine 1/2 x plus pi. Well, these are my x values. So I'll just plug in this x value. Let's see if I'm right. I'll erase this x value and I'll plug in a negative pi. Well, negative pi plus pi is 0. 1/2 times 0 is still 0. So cosine of 0 is just 1. And that's what I have. Okay? So you could also just plug in these numbers and get each of your points as well. Make sense, guys? Okay, I'm going to give you guys another one. Write this down on your paper. We're going to do -2 sine x plus pi plus 1. So your amplitude is 2. Your period, we don't have a b value, so it's just 2 pi. Well, we do have a b value, it's just 1. So it's 2 pi. Your phase shift, you equal all of this to 0 and solve. So x plus pi, set it equal to 0, you get x is negative pi. So that's right here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and graph the information they gave me. They told me that my midline is at 1, so I know I'm going to be right here at 1. And I know that my period is 2 pi, so I have to graph this whole thing within 2 pi and break it up into 4 sections. So this would be pi over 2, pi, and 3 pi over 2. A whole circle is 2 pi. So we broke it into 4 sections, pi over 2, pi, and 3 pi over 2. That's how we get the period. Okay, however, we have to do a phase shift. So I'm just going to copy what I did. This is negative pi over 2, negative pi, and I can stop there because I just need to go to the left pi. So I'm going to be starting here instead of here. Make sense? Because I have a phase shift. All right, so let's go ahead and graph because I know my amplitude. The amplitude is 2. However, it's a negative. So I'm not going to go up like I normally do. I'm going to go down. I have to reflect. So here is that. I'm going to go down 2 spaces, so I'll be here, up 2, so that's my graph. My domain is always all real numbers. My range, the very bottom is at -1, and the very top is at 3. This is my relative maximum at the point pi/2, 3. And my relative minimum is at -pi/2, -1. And guys, just to emphasize my point, let's plug in some values. So this is my equation. And we'll replace x with these values along my x-axis. So I'll just plug in -pi. So I'll plug in a -pi right here. -pi plus pi, that's just 0. Sine of 0 is just 0. So this whole thing goes away. I'm left with +1. And that's why for -pi, I'm at 1. You guys see that? Okay, I'll plug in one more point. I'll plug in this -pi/2. So I have -2 sine. I'm plugging in -pi/2 this time into my function. Okay, so let me get the same denominator real quick. 2/2. Okay, so -pi/2 plus 2pi/2 is just pi/2. And I'll just copy down my function. Okay, sine at pi/2 is just 1. -2 times 1 is -2, plus 1 is -1. And that's why I have a point right there at -1. Make sense, guys? All right. Okay. Your next one. I'm going to give you guys a harder one. Let me give you guys a fraction. Let's do let's do y equals 1/4 cosine x plus 3pi/2 plus 1/4. If you want to warm up to this one, that's fine. There's plenty of other ones you can practice up there on the board. All right, so your amplitude is this number in the front, 1/4. It's always positive. Even if it's negative, you do the absolute value of it. All the negative tells you to do is reflect it. Your amplitude is distance, so it'll be a 1/4. Okay. Now let's talk about how to find the period. You have to do 2 pi divided by the absolute value of your b. This is 1, so it's just 2 pi. Your phase shift, you equal all of this to 0 and solve. So you would get -3pi/2. So let's go ahead and try to set up the graph. I know my period is 2 pi, and I need to break that into, I need to break that into 4 even parts. Okay, and I know I'm going to have to shift to the left, so I'm going to go ahead and copy this down. -3pi/2. Okay, so instead of starting right here for cosine, I'm going to make this 1/4 and 1/2, 3/4, and 1. And -1/4, 1/2, 3/4, negatives, and -1. Okay. So instead of starting right here for cosine, I need to shift this way and start here for my cosine. Because my amplitude is 1/4, so that means I need to be a space of 1/4. Oh, but where's my midline? 1/4. So my midline is right here at 1/4. So let me draw my midline. You know from this value right here, that's your D value, 1/4. So that's my midline. And I have to be 1/4 away. So I know it'll be right here. And just draw your 5 points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What it would normally look like is right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. However, it shifted to the left, -3π/2. So that's why it looks like this. And notice your amplitude is 1/4. From here to here is 1/4. From here to here is 1/4. And your midline is at 1/4. So that's how you graph it. And you guys can answer the questions for domain, range, and maximum and minimum. All right. I'm gonna put one more on here that I want you guys to try, and then you guys can do whichever order you guys want. I'll give you y equals negative sine 1/4 x plus 2π. I'm sorry, x plus 2π. All right, I'll give you guys some time to figure that out. Okay, so we need to distribute this. This will be 1/4 x plus π/2 when you distribute the 1/4. So this is your b value. To find the period, you do 2π over the absolute value of 1/4, and you get 8π. So that is your period, 8π. That means you need to break this into 4 equal parts. That's 2, 4, 6, and then 8. All right, now to find the phase shift, you have to set all of this equal to 0 and solve it. So that will be 1/4 x plus π/2 equals 0. 1/4 x equals -π/2. I just moved this to this side. And then multiply by 4. So it looks like you get x is equal to -2π. So that means we need to move to the left 2π. So let me extend what I have over onto this side. I really just need to write it until here, because we're just going over -2π. All right. Well, looking at my original problem, I don't have a d value, so my midline is right here. And sine is going to start right here. And I'll draw my 5 points. I'm going to go down because it's reflecting. That's what it should look like. Usually, I would go like this. Oh, usually it goes up first, but now I'm going down first because it has a negative in the front. It's reflecting. Your amplitude is still 1. Your domain is all real numbers. Your range is -1 to 1. This is your relative max at 4π/1. And your minimum is at 0, -1. That's your relative minimum.